Hello. In this video, I would like to introduce the HTC U23 Pro review. I trust that this video is very useful for you. I am introducing to you the detailed HTC U23 Pro review that is important, especially competition, verdict, pros and cons at the end of the video. Please kindly enjoy watching the video as following. It's been a hot minute since we saw an HTC phone at the GSMArena office. Chances are that most of you haven't really been seeing many HTC handsets in the wild either. It is hard to accurately pinpoint the current state of the former Taiwanese giant's smartphone research, production and manufacturing. You might remember that after collaborating heavily with Google on the Pixel line, HTC sold roughly half of its design and research talent and non-exclusive rights to smartphone-related intellectual property to Google in 2017 for $1.1 billion. Since then, HTC-branded phones have been few and far between and mostly in the budget price segment. Many of these rare Wildfire and Desire-branded phones have also been exclusive to the company's home Taiwanese market. We aren't even sure exactly who is manufacturing these and any current HTC devices like the U23 Pro we have for review today. Design. Let's not beat about the bush here. The HTC U23 Pro looks like a mid-range device through and through. Not only is it entirely made of plastic, but the size of its display bezels is so substantial that it kind of rivals some modern budget devices. The front of the phone is almost entirely flat. It is a large slab of Gorilla Glass Victus, which we can't complain about. As we said, the bezel situation is less than ideal, and it's not like HTC is making the most out of the extra space here, with nothing particularly special occupying the areas like a stereo speaker setup. The U23 Pro just has a singular bottom-firing speaker. There are a couple of sensors near the top of the phone on the front as well as the earpiece, both very subtly hidden away, which is nice to see. The phone's backside feels plastic, though we can't find any official info on the material. It features a very subtle, soft, smooth, almost velvet-like finish, which is nice to the touch but does seem to gather quite a bit of dirt and grease. The back panel is nicely curved around the edges, which makes for a very comfortable in-hard feel. Measuring 166.6 by 77.1 by 8.9 mm and weighing in at 205 grams, the U23 Pro is not unwieldy in any way. Quite the opposite, it is easy to handle and weight distribution is excellent. While there is some hollowness to the rear panel, the phone as a whole feels pretty sturdy with practically no flex. It's surprising, given that the middle frame also seems to be made of plastic. We really enjoy at least a couple of subtle design details, like the embossed HTC logo on the back side and the glass-like camera island. The latter protrudes quite a bit, making the phone wobble while sitting on a flat surface, but we like how it looks. Plus, this is a minor issue that does not affect ergonomics and basically, any phone case will quickly take care of. The HTC U23 Pro can be had in either snow white or coffee black color options. These only seem to affect the back side of the phone. The front bezels remain black in both cases. Both color options are very subdued and stealthy. The U23 Pro feels right at home in every environment, even a boardroom. Build quality. As we mentioned, despite being mostly made of plastic, the HTC U23 Pro feels sturdy and well put together. There is practically no flex to speak of. We have praised plastic as a building material in the past and will continue to do so. It does not scratch or dent quite like metal and does not shatter like glass. It is quite sturdy and structurally sound while remaining relatively lighter than the alternative materials. Sure, it doesn't feel or look quite as premium, but does that really matter if you are going to slap a case on anyway? That's a discussion for another day, though. Beyond its plastic sides and most likely back side, the U23 Pro actually has some excellent other standout points in its build. For one, the front is covered with Corning Gorilla Glass Victus. Sure, that's not Corning's latest and greatest material, but is still an excellent and confidence-inspiring choice. Probably most impressively, though, the U23 Pro has an IP67 ingress protection rating. That means that it should survive a dip in up to a meter of fresh water for up to 30 minutes. If your unit gets particularly grimy, you could confidently, though still carefully, wash it down with, say, a water and soap solution. Controls. The HTC U23 Pro has a rather interesting control set, mainly due to the inclusion of a side-mounted fingerprint reader. You don't see that often, particularly on a modern phone with an OLED display. Most manufacturers tend to now go for an in-display reader on their OLED devices. The fingerprint reader left us a bit wanting in terms of accuracy. The situation did improve slightly after re-registering the print, but it is still not the most reliable reader, which is odd given the maturity of the capacitive technology behind this sort of reader. Speed was fairly decent on the reader, but HTC includes a pretty sluggish unlock animation, which makes the perceived speed of operation quite slow. The actual button part of the fingerprint reader/power button combo works well enough. It has nice tactile feedback when pressed. It is also good to see that you can choose whether you want the fingerprint reader always on or triggered once you press the button. The volume buttons above the power button are well positioned and also offer decent tactile feedback. They are a bit on the smaller side, but we don't really mind that since that makes accidentally pressing them harder. The left side frame of the U23 Pro is entirely empty and uninterrupted, with no controls in sight. The phone's top side houses a 3.5mm audio jack, an increasingly rare addition at almost every price point. There is a secondary mic on here as well. The bottom side of the U23 Pro is pretty busy. The main microphone is here, and so is the sole bottom-firing speaker. The USB Type-C port and the SIM card tray are here, too. It is a hybrid design that can either take 2 nano SIM cards or 1 nano SIM and a microSD card for storage expansion. We would have preferred a dedicated microSD card slot, but this is better than no expandable storage. Curiously enough, the U23 Pro has an RGB notification LED, which is not something you often see. It is positioned in the top right corner on the front of the device above the display. Connectivity. The U23 Pro has a Snapdragon 7 Gen 1 chipset on board. It is a 5G chip with both SA and NSA sub-6 support on both SIM slots. The phone has GPS, GLONASS, Galileo and BDS support for positioning. Local connectivity includes dual-band Wi-Fi 6, AX, as well as Bluetooth 5.2 with LE support. There is NFC on board, too, but no FM radio receiver. The USB port on the U23 Pro is actually quite capable. Expectedly, it supports USB host/OTG functionality. Not only that, but it does so at USB 3.0 speeds, which is to say USB 3.1 Gen 1, using newer naming, or USB 3.2 Gen 1, using newer still naming, or USB superspeed, if you prefer that terminology. USB naming foolery aside, it can transfer data at up to 5 gigabits per second. Beyond that, however, the Type-C port also supports video output, which you don't see often. The U23 Pro has a pretty good set of sensors on board. There is a TDK InvenSense ICM4X607 gyroscope and accelerometer combo, a SensorTech STK_STK3A5X hardware proximity and light sensor, and a Voltafield AF6133E magnetometer and compass combo. The only major omission from the list is a barometer. 6.7-inch 120Hz OLED display. The 6.7-inch 1080 by 2400 pixel display of the HTC U23 Pro looks pretty good on paper. It is an OLED panel and one with 120 Hz refresh rate. Once we actually put the display through its paces and our standardized testing, we were left a lot less impressed. Let's start with brightness. We measure a maximum of 725 nits on the slider, which is decent enough for most outdoor scenarios but fails to impress. The U23 Pro has auto brightness, which works pretty well, but does not appear to boost maximum brightness any further. Well, saying that, we did measure 727 nits of max brightness in auto mode, but 2 nits is hardly a difference and well within the margin of error. Battery life. The U23 Pro is based on a pretty modern Snapdragon 7 Gen 1 chipset. It uses a 4nm Samsung 4LPE manufacturing process. The onboard battery pack is a decent 4600 mAh in size, not too large, but not overly small either. We can't say that the battery endurance of the U23 Pro impressed us in any way. In our testing, it only managed 83 hours of total endurance. The phone didn't impress in any particular part of the test, but generally did alright in the video playback and 3G talk time portions. However, its poor standby time and Wi-Fi browsing tests really held it back. Charging speed. Unfortunately, HTC does not ship the U23 Pro with a charger. The company isn't super clear on what charging protocols the phone supports either. All we know from the specs is that it should be able to charge at a rate of up to 30 W. After testing known good and versatile chargers, we discovered that the U23 Pro negotiates a power delivery (PD) charging session with a charger when available, with a possible fallback to quick charge. The phone does not seem to require PPS or anything fancy of the sort, so you should be good with a decent 30W or better PD 3.0 charger and cable combo. In terms of charging speed, we managed to get the phone from dead to 33% in 15 minutes and then 60% in 30 minutes. A full charge took an hour and 18 minutes. That's not particularly fast, but it's still alright in the grand scheme of things. Speaker. As already mentioned, the U23 Pro only has a single bottom-firing speaker at its disposal. There is no stereo setup, not even a hybrid one. That's quite a bummer since a stereo setup can be attained in this price bracket. On the plus side, the U23 Pro did manage to score a very good loudness score in our testing, even if just barely so. In terms of frequency response, the output of the U23 Pro is actually quite clean. Mids, in particular, like voices, sound good and clear. There are no additional audio settings to tweak or experiment with. No equalizer or anything like that. You are stuck with what HTC offers out of the box. Clean Android 13 OS. The HTC U23 Pro runs Android 13 out of the box. The ROM in question looks very clean and minimalistic, but we can't shake the feeling that there is just something retro about its styling. Perhaps it has something to do with the square window prompts that the OS generates by default, perhaps it is the touch response sounds enabled by default, or maybe it's the fact that the out-of-box system navigation choice are the old-school Android buttons. A quad-camera setup with plenty of fluff. HTC seemingly went for quantity over quality when it came to the camera selection on the U23 Pro and the versatility of the camera setup. For rear cameras with a 108MP snapper at the helm sound pretty good on paper. However, dig a bit deeper, and you'll quickly realize that these include a dedicated 5MP macro cam and a 2MP depth sensor. We would have preferred a telephoto camera instead to go along with the 8MP ultra-wide. Then again, The main 108MP cam has plenty of resolution and could capture at least decent 2x zoom shots. Before we get to that, however, we should do a rundown of the camera hardware the U23 Pro is working with. The primary 108MP camera is based on a Samsung S5 HM6 sensor. It is more commonly known as the ISOCELL HM6. It has a nonapixel RGB Bayer arrangement, January 1 67-inch optical format and 0.64 m individual pixels. The U23 Pro has it sitting behind an f/1.7 lens with OIS support. There is PDAF as well. Then, there is the 8MP ultra-wide cam. It is based on the Samsung S5K4H7 sensor or, more colloquially, the ISOCELL 4H7. It has a 1/4 size and 1.12 m individual pixels. It sits behind a rather dim f/2.4 lens and has no autofocus. Then, there is the 5MP dedicated macro cam. It is also fixed focus and uses a Hynix Hi556 sensor. It sits behind an f/2.2 lens. Finally, on the rear, we have a 2MP depth sensor. It is based on the Galaxy Core GC02M1, 1/5 size and 1.75 m individual pixels sensor and sits behind an f/2.4 lens. On the front, the HTC U23 Pro has a 32MP selfie cam. It uses a quad Bayer OmniVision OV32C sensor with 1/3.2-inch optical format and 0.7 m pixels. The lens has a rather dim aperture of f/2.5. It has a fixed focus, so there is nothing fancy here either. The competition. At the time of writing, an HTC U23 Pro will set you back about £499/€550/$670 for a 12GB RAM and 256GB storage unit and €519/£449 on promo. Availability seems pretty good with Amazon US, Canada, UK and Germany listings. You can also get one straight from HTC.com in a bunch of other countries. That is not exactly a budget price point, and plenty of alternatives are available at a similar price point. Many similar devices are quite a bit cheaper, putting into question the value proposition HTC is making here. Let's kick things off with Samsung and the popular Galaxy A54, which fits the same budget. A 128GB per 8GB model will run you just around €350, while a 256GB per 8GB variant costs about €399, making it notably cheaper than the U23 Pro. The Samsung phone matches the expandable storage of the U23 Pro and also offers IP67 ingress protection and Gorilla Glass 5 protection for its display. The Galaxy A54 also has a 120Hz AMOLED panel with HDR10+ support. Battery life is notably better on the Galaxy, although the Samsung mid-ranger is limited to 25W charging. The Galaxy A54 also has better 50MP OIS-enabled main and 12MP ultra-wide cameras but lacks a telephoto shooter. Another Samsung phone worth mentioning is the much cheaper Galaxy A34, which brings a similar overall experience on a much tighter budget. Unsurprisingly, there are a couple of viable options over in Camp Xiaomi. For less than the U23 Pro, you can get a POCO F5 with Gorilla Glass 5, stereo speakers, a large 5000 mAh battery with 67W charging, a 12-bit 120Hz HDR-capable AMOLED display, a potent Snapdragon 7 Plus Gen 2 chipset and a pretty versatile camera setup with a 64MP OIS-enabled main shooter. Alternatively, you could lower the budget quite significantly and go for something like the ever-popular Redmi Note 12 Pro. Despite its lower price, it still offers much of the same Xiaomi experience. Including the stereo speakers, 5000 mAh battery with 67W charging in a 10-bit 120Hz HDR AMOLED display. The Xiaomi POCO X5 Pro is another option quite similar to the Redmi with a Snapdragon chipset and better battery life, but also some concessions, like no OIS. Another alternative is Vivo's V27 Pro. It missed on a European launch, but where available, it represents a great choice for less money than the U23 Pro. It is hard to ignore the Realme 11 Pro Plus in that category. Its starting MSRP is less than €300. All the while, it offers stereo speakers, a large 5000 mAh battery with a whopping 100W charging and pretty good battery endurance. It also has a large 6.7-inch HDR10 plus 120Hz OLED display. The Realme 11 Pro Plus has a very interesting camera setup in its own right, with a 200MP f/1.7 main snapper with OIS. Last but not least, why not consider a Google Pixel? As long as a large display isn't high up on your wish list. The new Pixel 7a would naturally be our first choice with its 90Hz OLED display, 64MP main camera and nicer 13MP selfie. If that happens to be a bit too pricey for you, then there is the older Pixel 6a, which is far from outdated. Sure, you'll have to live with a 60Hz refresh rate and a much smaller display, but one that is still HDR capable. The Pixel 6a also offers IP67 ingress protection stereo speakers and decent battery endurance. Its camera system is still world-class, mostly thanks to Google's prowess in computational photography. And all of this, plus pure Android and very long software support, can be had for just around €330 at current pricing. Our verdict. As mentioned multiple times, the U23 Pro is not a cheap device. While technically, it happens to be the HTC's headliner, that is simply due to the lack of better hardware in the company's roster. In objective terms, it cannot rub shoulders with competing flagship offers. In fact, most of the U23 Pro's competitors out there are noticeably cheaper. It's just not a great value proposition. You can get better hardware out there for less. That being said, prices change constantly, and it is always a good idea to try and evaluate a phone as a product regardless of pricing. There are certain aspects of the HTC U23 Pro we found quite enjoyable. Its design is nice and classy. The inclusion of Gorilla Glass Victus and an IP67 ingress protection rating are both highly appreciated and stand out in the mid-range. We also like the inclusion of a 3.5mm audio jack, an RGB notification LED and a very capable USB 3.0 Type-C interface with video output. Unfortunately, the U23 Pro fails to nail many of the basics. Its display could be brighter and more color accurate, the thick bezels are quite noticeable, too, the high refresh rate handling leaves a lot to be desired. The battery life is disappointing, and the camera experience is decent at best. Frankly, the U23 Pro left us a bit wanting. We expected a lot more out of HTC's return to the international phone scene, even if it's a mid-range device. Pros. Large OLED screen, even if it has big bezels. Stylish, if slightly lower-end design. Sturdy, ergonomic build. Gorilla Glass Victus and IP67 ingress protection. Expandable storage. 3.5mm audio jack, NFC and RGB notification LED on board. Cons. No charger in the box. The side-mounted fingerprint reader is not terribly accurate. Display could be brighter and more color accurate. High refresh rate handling is poor. Unimpressive battery life. Just a single speaker. Aggressive CPU thermal throttling under load. Thank you for watching. See you next videos.